The game I'm going to show you in this video is simply amazing. We are going to have a look at an insane game played by former world champion Alexander ALEKHINE. The game is played back in Moscow 1915, more than 100 years ago. And we don't know who his opponent was, or the game was actually played, or it was just created by someone. Anyway, it's very entertaining and you will learn a lot from it because we get to see 5 queens on the board, which means a lot of tactics and every move really matters. So let's dive straight into the action, subscribe to the channel and I will show you what happened. ALEKHINE plays the move 1 e4 and ALEKHINE was a really sharp player with a very good sense for the initiative, and he also contributed to a lot of openings. For instance, we know that he developed the opening starting with the move knight f6. The opening is named after him, but we don't get to see it in this game because he's playing with the white pieces and his opponent played the move e6. It's the French defense. d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5. White is pinning the knight on f6, and so does black. By playing the move bishop b4, we get already a very sharp opening because both knights are pinned, huge pressure on the center, and this is called the McCutcheon variation. White now wants to do something about his pawn on e4, push it to e5, attacking the knight, and therefore black plays here the move h6. Counter-attacking the bishop, and there are various ways of playing here. The main continuation nowadays is just to drop back with the bishop to d2 so that the bishop is saved and you're unpinning the knight. White is in good shape in that line, but ALEKHINE goes for this move. Pawn takes knight. So black is forced to take on g5, but now white continues, takes on g7. So white is a pawn up, threatening to take the rook. Black has no choice but to play here the move rook g8. So black very likely is going to win back the pawn on g7. That's what we can expect here, but things are not that simple because black's king is in the center, and also black will have to make some additional moves to complete its development. So white is trying to play really fast here, goes for the move h4. That's an interesting idea, so that you're challenging the pawn on g5. Now, if black would take the pawn on g7, then the idea is to take on g5, and white is threatening to go rook h8. So by launching the h-pawn, the rook just can be brought directly into play. But okay, this didn't happen. Instead, black went here for the move pawn takes h4, but here queen g4 played. So the queen protects the pawn on g7, and as long as that pawn stays on the board, there are some issues regarding black's king safety. The rook on g8 cannot easily move. But okay, black should try to do something to eliminate that pawn, as simple as that. So the most common move here is just to go queen f6. I think that's a very simple, logical move, bringing the queen into play, and on the next move you're about to take the pawn on g7. But instead, black goes for the move bishop e7, and now it's clear that black is playing very ambitiously by protecting the pawn on h4. Black is trying to keep that rook from h1 out of the game. White goes for this move, g3. That's an interesting move. It's not easy for black to do something about this h-pawn. If you do take, then you open up the h-file, and who knows, maybe the rook will come to h8, leading to a lot of problems, because one of white's main strategies here is just to let the g-pawn promote. Therefore, black doesn't want to do something about that pawn on h4, keeps it there to keep the h-file closed. But black goes here for the move c5, opening up the center, challenging the pawn on d4, but I'm not sure this is a wise decision. There are various possibilities here. You can take the pawn on c5, you can continue developing, for instance, by castling queenside. You can also take the pawn on h4. Interesting move. Now white no longer is intending to activate the rook along the h-file, but there's a different plan. Black takes the pawn on d4, and the pawn of course can be recaptured, but that's not what ALEKHINE has in mind here. He, instead of doing something about that knight on c3, which is hanging, he is just continuing the attack by pushing the h-pawn. Black captures the knight, and now the pawn lands on h6, and black is just one square away from getting the pawn to the 7th rank. And once the pawn will be there, the rook is under pressure, and one of the pawns, or maybe both pawns, will be promoted next. But look at this. Black is first. Black captures on b2. Important tempo. So the pawn is threatening to take the rook on a1 with check. Therefore, rook b1 is the most logical move. And now black goes for the counterattack with queen a5 check. So white at the moment doesn't get a chance to push its own pawns. Has to do something about that check. Where are you going with your king? Well, not to d1, because then queen takes a2 will be played. And it's the problem with the rook on b1, which is hanging with check. Therefore, the king better goes to e2, because now, if you do ever take on a2, the rook cannot be captured with check. This is very important moment, because what should black do? Should he look for his own chances, or should he do something about these pawns? Well, one very interesting and difficult move to find here is something like bishop f8. And this may look strange, because you do give white the possibility to capture the bishop with check, regaining the piece, but then your main asset, that pawn on g7, is no longer on the board. So black is ready to give back the piece to neutralize the potential threat of white getting a new queen. It was not played in the game, and even after bishop f8, pawn takes, rook takes f8. I mean, it's really sharp. Maybe white is going to take, or maybe white is going to push its own pawn anyway. A lot of things can happen here. So what black did is much more interesting, in fact, because there followed queen takes a2, attacking the rook. Now, if the rook goes away, then black is about to make a new queen himself. But there follows h7. White is threatening to take the rook on g8 with check. And that's what happens, because the rook doesn't have a good escape square, cannot really go anywhere, will always be captured. So black takes on b1. But not with check, because the king is here. H takes g8 queen, forcing the king to go to d7. So this is a very bizarre situation. White is a queen up, okay, for one minor piece, and both sides still have a passed pawn. It's all about king safety. That's very typical for positions with major pieces on the board, and especially when there are a lot of queens on the board. So you got to be careful. I mean, black is also planning just to move the queen away and promote a b-pawn. So it's not about a number of queens, but who is able to approach the enemy's king first. Well, white captures on f7. So just capturing a pawn, preparing the g-pawn to be promoted. But black captures with check on c2. King has to go away. King f3 was played. And this is a very, very sharp position, because what should black do? If you do promote your b-pawn here, then black will just allow white to take on e6 with check. That's a big problem. If you go for the move king to c7, if you do take, then black can still block with a piece by interfering on d7. But much stronger here is this move, queen f4 check. And the queens are taking away the remaining squares. You can only go back to d8. But now you get a third queen, and it's going to be checkmate on the next move. So there's no time for black to promote the b-pawn. Instead, knight c6 is played here. And that's a sort of clever idea, because you're trying to run away with the king in case of a number of checks are following. So what should be done here is not easy to find. The most obvious move, queen takes e6, was played, but better is to promote first, because if black promotes now, then you do take on e6, and after king to c7, you're just able to take on e7, and this is leading to checkmate very soon. One of the problems is that if you do take on e7, well, then the queen comes to g3 again. All the squares have been covered, And if you go king d8, then it's rook h8 with mate to come. So big missed opportunity for white, but let's see the difference. Queen takes e6 played, king c7, and now okay, you're just about to go away. Also the queen on e6 is hanging now. So white played here this move, queen f4, check. If the king goes back, then you promote your g-pawn, that's clear. But the king goes to b6. Queen e3. Queen from e6 to e3 played because this queen was under threat. Now the queen is kind of safe on e3. But what is going on here? Well, you got to do something about a check. You got to block somehow, either on c5 or d4 with one of your pieces. If you do play here this move d4, attacking the queen with tempo, then bishop d3 is kind of the only move to hold on. You're not moving the queen. You're not minding black to capture your queen, because you would take with your bishop on c2 and neutralize the threat of black's b-pawn. So black is probably lost in this case, but it's still a total mess in that case. Bishop c5 was played, and this is critical, guys, because the bishop hits the queen. Now white promotes first, g8 queen, so it's 3 versus 1 queen. And well, black promoted here the b-pawn. We will just check in a second what happens in that case. But what happens after bishop takes queen? Well, then you do take with the queen, with a check. And this time black is not able to block with a d-pawn, because it allows the queen from g8 to come back into defense. You can just play queen b3, one of the queens, doesn't matter which one actually. So it's a check, and you are forcing the exchange of queens. White remains a queen up, and the b-pawn will be eliminated. Instead of playing the move d4, you can go away with the king, but then it's queen g3 with check again. King goes away, rook h8, and this is just going to be checkmate in a few moves. So after g8 queen, black doesn't capture the queen on e3, but instead promotes its own b-pawn. This is a unique situation. I cannot remember having seen something even close to this. It's 3 queens for white versus 2 queens of black. But as I said earlier, it's not about the number of queens. It's about king safety, because the queen on e3 is hanging. But if the queen would go away, let's say you put a queen on d3, trying to force the exchange of one pair of queens, then it's just queen takes f2 with checkmate. King can't go anywhere as the bishop covers the g4 square. So you see that it's not simple at all here. What should white do? It's an interesting moment. You may pause the video here for a second to think about what you think is the best move. It was played by ALEKHINE in the game, because he doesn't move the queen away, but brings another piece into the attack. And it's not one of these 3 queens. He just brings the rook from h1 to h6. And that's an absolutely amazing idea, because the rook is fantastically placed here on the 6th rank, pinning the knight on c6, which means that the knight is a really bad defender. For instance, if black would take the queen on e3, you're not going to take back, but you give a check on d8. Now the knight cannot take because it's pinned. And if the king goes to c5, there are various ways to convert, but the most spectacular one is to sacrifice your queen by capturing the pawn on d5, forcing black to take it. And then there is queen d6 with checkmate. All the squares are nicely covered. The rook supports the queen, and the black king cannot go anywhere. So that's not possible. What should black do? Well, very difficult. Bishop g4 check is an interesting idea. It's a discovered check, so you're attacking the queen, but the queen from g8 will capture on g4. Now the difference is that, okay, you've given back your piece. Now it's bishop takes e3, queen takes e3, but white is here just a piece up. So for instance, if you go for queen c5, then you will go for the exchange of queens. Now black is putting pressure along the back rank. Rook f8 is an idea. But after king g2, white should eventually be able to convert. Not an easy line at all. But let's see what happened in the game. Because this is absolutely fantastic what we are going to witness now. Because in the game there followed queen takes f1. So black is coming closer with its queen to the white king. And once again, if the queen goes away, there are all these mating threats against that pawn on f2. But the key move here is this. Queen b4 check. Fantastic coordination by the white pieces. And here you see that the knight is pinned. The bishop is also pinned. So the queen on b4 simply cannot be captured. If you do play king a6, then the simplest move here is queen a3 with a ladder made along the a and b file. In the game there followed the move queen to b5. But now it's queen d8 check. So fantastic, so many pins next to each other. Knight is still pinned, of course. Therefore the check is really strong. King has to go to a6. Now it's queen from e3 to a3 with check. You got a block, and now just very simple prosaic solution by just capturing the queen on a4, and that is checkmate. Let me know what you think of this game. I have never seen something like that. If you know any similar example, please drop a note in the comments, and I'm curious to cover that game at some point maybe as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. All the support is appreciated, and soon much more exciting games like this one.